This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
He retired from the LA County Sheriff's Department, serving 21 years. He worked patrol, he worked undercover, and the last 7 years as part of their elite homicide detective bureau. He's also a private investigator, a consultant, and an author of 5 books. He's here to talk about a notoriously vicious and violent case that he investigated. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Today radio show. I'm your host. My name's John J. Wiley. In addition to being a radio broadcaster, I'm a retired police sergeant. For the latest news articles and much more, check out our website, letradioshow.com. In the Law Enforcement Today show, we'll be joined by special guests. We'll be talking about their experiences and issues affecting law enforcement officers, first responders, their families, their community, and victims of horrendous crimes. Be sure to like us on Facebook. Our page is Law Enforcement Today Radio Show. Check out the daily articles on our website, letradioshow.com. And while you're there, download our free app. Calling from Idaho, we have retired Los Angeles County Sheriff's Detective Danny Smith on the phone. Danny worked in patrol. He worked undercover. He spent the last 7+ years of his career in the elite homicide detective bureau. And he is also a private investigator, a consultant, and author of the Dickie Floyd novels. Get more information about all the books. I think there's 5 of them. DickieFloydNovels.com. Danny, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jay. I'm happy to be on here.
It's a pleasure having you. And I've been aware of you and your work for a while. We just never been able to make this happen. And now we have. Before we get really into the details, you were LA Sheriff's Department. From what I know of them right now, everybody that's brand new starts in corrections there, correct?
Yes. Well, there are very few exceptions, but there's a few. If you're very young looking, you might get recruited out of the academy to go straight into narcotics before you have any exposure. But the bulk of all sheriff's deputies go to work the jail first, because in LA County we have a jail system that takes care of about 20,000 inmates at any given time. So it's quite a task and requires a lot of personnel.
Did you have to do that?
I did. I had to spend 2.5 years in men's Central Jail. At the time, it was the largest jail in the county and throughout most of the country. And after the 2.5 year stint, I was sent to patrol in South Central Los Angeles at a station called Firestone.
Well, my hat's off to you, because first of all, the corrections part of it, it takes a special person to do that. I don't have the skill set, and I'll be honest with you, Danny, I don't know if I could develop it. Just the noise alone, on top of the constant threats of violence, I think I would put me over the edge.
It's interesting, though, Jay. Most cops don't become cops to work in custody. They want to be on the street. That's why most of us become cops. But in hindsight, it's a great education, and it's in a controlled environment. So I used to look at it like this. The guys that graduated from LAPD's academy went straight to the streets, and they still didn't know anything, because you don't learn how to deal with crooks during the academy. You learn procedures and tactics, but you don't learn really how to interact with really bad guys until you hit the streets, unless you go to custody. And at custody, it was a controlled environment. We were dealing with the hardest core criminals and gangsters, and by the time we got to the streets, we knew a lot of the people that we would interact with for the rest of our careers.
You're absolutely right about the academy. We learned law, we learned tactics, we learned rules and regulations, all this stuff. And when I graduated, Danny, I thought I was like number 2 in the class. I thought I was really well prepared. I thought I knew what was going on. About 5 minutes on the street, I realized I had no clue.
Yeah, no, your real education begins when you start interacting with, the elements that we deal with, and that's why I said, that for that and that alone, custody was a really great experience.
And from there, you went to patrol. And by the way, I got to say this because I love when people tell me, hey, I'm going to go into police work and I want to be a homicide detective. I'm going to the academy. I'll be a homicide detective as soon as I graduate. And I'm saying, well, that's not quite how it works there, pal. You there's a lot to learn, but we all start in patrol. So you guys start in corrections and then you can patrol. And that's where the lessons probably really multiply for you.
Yeah, sure. And of course, depending on what jurisdiction you work, I mean, where we worked in South Los Angeles and I was patrol deputy, I went in the 80s, 86 is when I went out to patrol. And through the late 80s and early 90s, the cocaine epidemic struck the United States and murder rates soared. So it was one of the most violent times to be a street cop, especially in any major metropolitan area like Los Angeles. And it was busy and it was active and you learned fast. It was quite the education.
That's another great point you brought up. Right now, it's certainly an anti-police climate by politicians, the news media, everybody else. But back in the day, it was very violent, and we had lots of police across the United States. I mean, police, I say, law enforcement officers, sheriffs, you name it, murdered or maimed in the line of duty, and probably far more than there are today.
I don't know for sure the statistics on that. I did recently. When I was writing my memoir, I did a little research on just murder rates, and that period of time, the late 80s, early 90s, had the most murder rates of any time before or since then. But I didn't actually look up to see what the rates were as far as police officers killed in the line of duty.
Yeah, it was very violent back then and violent now. And I thank you for your service. It's very much appreciated. You went from patrol to undercover. When you say undercover, does that mean narcotics?
No, I actually went from patrol to station detectives first. And station detectives is just that. Every station, patrol station has their own detectives. You investigate everything, all the crimes that are reported, other than the specialized crimes like homicide. So we'd investigate, robberies and kidnapping and sexual assaults and burglaries, etc. But then, we'd investigate all the drive-by shootings, the assaults with deadly weapon, and attempted murder. But when someone is killed, the Homicide Bureau would come and investigate that. It's kind of an interesting setup with the LA County Sheriff's how we operated that way. But I worked station detectives for a couple of years, and then within that same bureau, the station detectives, I began working undercover in a role. It was for the crime impact team. And we did different things. We did everything from vice investigation to narcotics investigation and surveillance, things of that nature.
And then you graduated to the homicide detective job.
Well, I actually took one more step before I got the homicide, and it is a step up. I went from station detectives to what's called detective division, and I landed a spot at the Metro Detail Special Investigations Bureau, and that was a really exciting job, and it too was undercover. We investigated murder for hire, kidnap for ransom, threats on public officials. We did fugitive work. It was a really specialized and highly active investigative position.
We're going to take a short break. We are talking with Danny Smith. He is a retired LA County Sheriff's Detective. He's also an author of 5 books, the Dickie Floyd novels. We're going to talk about his homicide detective experience, in particular, a very vicious, violent case. We'll return on the Law Enforcement Today show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. If you enjoy the Law Enforcement Today podcast, do me a big favor. Tell a friend. And if you're able, if you got a few moments, Leave an honest review and rating.
I am Meg Marie O'Rourke from Harmony with Food. Do you ever wonder what foods you should or should not be consuming based on your own unique needs? At Harmony with Food, we are now able to determine exactly what foods we should or should not be consuming through advanced testing. Test, don't guess is the motto at Harmony with Food's BioUnique Boutique program. It has never been easier than now to determine what food, drinks, and supplements you need for your individualized needs. Head over to harmonywithfood.com and click on the testing tab.
This portion of the Law Enforcement Today radio show is brought to you in part by Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. Everyone's welcome at the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page, where you'll find fun, informative, and enjoyable posts daily. Purebred, mixed breeds, rescues, we love them all. Be sure to like the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. Return conversation with Danny Smith, retired L.A. County Sheriff's Detective. He did 21 years. He's a private detective. He is, or I should say, private investigator detective. It's not like the Mannix movies or Rockford Files, I can tell you that. He's a consultant. He's author of the Dickie Floyd novels. You can get more information about all of his books online at DickieFloydNovels.com. Before we went to break, Danny, we're talking about your career progression from working in corrections to patrol on the street to station detectives, and then you got elevated to homicide detective. And the reason I bring that up is we see these shows on television about homicide detectives, and a lot of people don't realize how good they are at police work. They've done everything from soup to nuts, and they are well experienced by the time they get there. It's very rare indeed, where someone comes in and they're very young and they've got almost no street experience. You did a great job, and I appreciate your efforts along the way.
Thank you, Jay. And yes, it is. Homicide's a very specialized investigative unit, and typically in most departments throughout the country, it's the cream of the crop that rise to that level. The most hardworking, dedicated investigators, because that's what it takes to investigate murder. There's a tremendous amount of stress. The job takes a tremendous toll on you, and you have to be in it because you absolutely love being a detective and because you want to solve the toughest cases. And it takes a special type of cop to do that job.
Absolutely. I've had Rod Demery on the show from Investigating Discovery Channel. He's retired. I think it's Baton Rouge. Joe Kenda, some other ones that they don't tell you. Most cops I know won't blow their own horns. They won't tell you what it took, and they won't tell you the toll that being on scenes of people who have been murdered is one of the hardest things for me to deal with. There's still people that I remember. And quite honestly, I can say this without shame. I'm not the same person I was when I was 20, and it's understandable. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because, there's things that people have no clue about, just because you wouldn't know unless someone told you. But, as a homicide detective, you're working all the time. You might think you're going to take a few days vacation and go somewhere with your wife, but you live and die by your informants, your victims' families and loved ones. I mean, if someone calls because they found something out about a murder, you take that call, and it doesn't matter what time of the day or night it is. Or if a gang detective calls and says, "Hey, we've got Flacco from La Puente in jail, and I think you were interested in him on that drive-by murder," you don't say, "Well, that's cool, but I'm off until Tuesday. I'll get back to you." You kiss the wife goodbye, you put on a suit, and you drive to wherever that person's being detained, and you interview him. Otherwise, you don't dare ever ask another gang cop to try to find, Flacco or any other gangster that you want to talk to. So it's a job that it requires so much personal sacrifice, and then of course, like you said, the toll of just the deaths that stack up and the tragic ones. Those are the ones that stay with you forever, and it does take a lot out of a guy to do that job.
One of the things, I believe a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about policing, and I blame Hollywood for that, to be honest with you, is that, The unsolved cases, the cases we couldn't solve, quite often we knew who did it, or we had a strong suspicion who did it. We just couldn't get enough probable cause to take them to court. And those ones really bother people. All the ones you said were so heinous, even if you solved it, they bother you, and they will for your life. There is a case in Baltimore about a young girl who was, I think she was 10 or 11 at the time, was abducted, was sexually assaulted, and was murdered. And it was my crew, my squad that handled it. I was off that day. But the homicide detectives, one was dying of cancer, and they could never charge someone with this. They knew who did it. And on his deathbed, he was looking for clues on how he could solve this. And this was, I can't tell you, almost 30 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, the more innocent the victim, the more the case bothers you. So, of course, children take the greatest toll. But you mentioned something about this poor detective dying and still worried about that case. People don't realize you retire and you still have these cases that stay with you and that you become involved with. And just over the last few months, I've been interacting with the parole board on a case, this guy that beat his estranged girlfriend to death. And then he beats another man to death while he's in prison. They don't even charge him for that. And they're trying to, parole him. And I'm writing letters to the parole board and interacting with the family. And I've been retired for 17 years, Jay.
Right. Yeah. And you're still doing it. You're still a beat cop. You're still doing the job.
Yeah. I mean, you might hang up your gun and badge, but I mean, it's not just a job. It's what has defined you, and you're never going to close the door on people that ask. And the family members of murder victims, oftentimes, homicide detectives end up with this bond that doesn't just go away. So 20 years later, when they call you up and say, hey, they're trying to parole this guy, actually it was 25 years ago that the case happened, but almost 25 years ago, and the victim family gets in touch with me through social media, and actually found me through my website and contacted me and said, hey, they're going to try to let this guy out on parole. And so I've been writing letters to the parole board and doing what I can, doing my part. But, those are the things that you just don't, the average person would never know, have a clue about.
You also are dealing with a parole board for a state who doesn't seem to really have logic in their processes of when they release people.
Well, that's true. And then worse than that, LA County has this new prosecutor. I'm sure that
I know of him. Yeah,
heard about Gascon.
Yeah,
but this guy is so anti-cop and pro-criminal that he is no longer allowing his prosecutors to go to these parole hearings and stand for the victims. So normally a process like this guy that's up for parole, there would be a prosecutor who takes the file and goes to that parole hearing and says, this is why you shouldn't be paroled. And Gascon, he's not allowing the prosecutors to do that.
The politics, and I'm going to let people know very upfront. You listen to the show for a while, I don't talk about partisan politics. And most cops I know don't either. We are not big fans of either side. However, when someone has a job to do that is protecting the innocent, we expect them to do their job. And when they don't do their job, we are some of the first to hold them accountable. And sometimes we can use colorful language when we describe people like Gascon. This is the Law Enforcement Today Show. We're talking with Danny Smith. Danny is a retired LA County Sheriff's Detective. Last 7+ years of career in homicide. He's now a novelist, amongst other things, the Dickie Floyd novels. Go online to DickieFloydNovels.com. Get more information. We return. We're going to talk about a particularly violent, vicious, heinous case that he investigated. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. There's only one official Facebook page. What you do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Today radio show. Click like and follow. There you'll find updates about upcoming episodes of the radio show. You can contact me. We also find unique, one-of-a-kind editorials and news articles. That is our Facebook page, Law Enforcement Today Radio Show. Be sure to click like and follow. What is the Haunting or Not podcast? It's a free podcast that takes a different approach to ghost stories, hauntings, and cases of demonic forces. Husband and wife podcast hosts mix comedy, facts, and a healthy dose of police evidence skepticism to help you decide, are these hauntings or not? Helping you decide what's real and what is fake or an overhyped exaggeration. From world-famous cases to lesser-known reports, they talk about them all in the Haunting or Not podcast, available for free on most podcast platforms. Or do a Google search for Haunting or Not podcast. If you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for @LET Radio Show. That's John J. Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, @LET Radio Show on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. Return conversation with Danny Smith. Danny is retired LA County Sheriff's Detective, worked 7+ years, the end of his career in their Homicide Detective Bureau. He is also an author of the Dickie Floyd novels. Go online to dickiefloydnovels.com. And I think, was it 5 books you've written, Danny?
No, I have actually 7 novels published and a memoir that was just now published that is, of course, a true story. So
you make me sound like I am a really non-achiever, a slacker. 7 novels. Look, when I retired from police work, I thought I would write the great American novel or open an Irish pub. And it turns out I'm glad I didn't do either one because they both require a lot of work. And one is, you'd have to be married to it. And I don't want to do that. So you were writing these books. Did you do it for therapy reasons or entertainment or both?
Well, man, you just hit the bullseye with that question. That's the $1,000 question or $10,000 question. I actually started writing because when I left the job, I was diagnosed with chronic PTSD, and my shrink that they sent me to was impressed with the writing that I had submitted prior to our first meeting. There was a list of questions asking about, what type of experiences led me to that point. And I typed up about 14 pages of a response. And this shrink looked at me and said, "Hey, you should write for a living." Well, I'd never considered writing for a living. I kind of, that wasn't really what mattered to me at that point. But after I retired and while I was going through a process, I had to have a couple of surgeries. I did start writing and the shrink said, "Hey, it'd be therapeutic." And it turned out he was right. It was very therapeutic for me to write. And so for the years that followed, I wrote fiction, and it's taken me this long to write my memoir because, and I couldn't have written it any earlier, to be honest, Jay, because even 17 years after I retired, as I wrote this, I mean, man, it's been a flood of emotions, and it's brought back, some of the nightmares and everything else. And it's been a difficult process, but again, it is very therapeutic to write. And I not only enjoy it for that reason, but, it's become something that I almost have to do. Like, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's like I bleed through these pages sometimes.
I get it. I've written a few articles for law enforcement. You go to letradioshow.com, look for my name, you'll find them. And I've written a few under pseudonyms where I didn't use my name for obvious reasons. One of the things, and by the way, I'm an older guy, a little bit older than you probably. I was raised and I really got fascinated with police work by reading books, which became TV shows by Joseph Wambaugh. Were you influenced by him at all?
Oh yeah, that's funny. I mean, what cop didn't read Joseph Wambaugh when you're our generation, yours or mine? But I was reading Wambaugh before I got in the department, and it's interesting. I'm a huge fan of his, and I've communicated with him a few times since I started writing. But, something that's really interesting, and I don't know if other cops have ever had this experience, but when I read his books before I was a cop, I found them entertaining. I've gone back and read some of his books since I retired, and they have a completely different effect on me, especially The Onion Field.
Oh, The Onion Field killed me.
Yeah, when I read it earlier, when I was a young cop or just before I became a cop, I mean, it definitely, I found it, interesting, enthralling, tragic. But reading it now, I just read it again a year or two ago. And, man, it was tough to get through because of all those experiences that now burden me. And I'm reading this book, and, man, it was tough. It was a completely different read for me after having been through that experience.
I highly recommend everybody read his novels, and underlying most of them is, you come in this profession with a real idealistic attitude. You want to help, you want to serve, you want to do everything else, and you become so psychologically scarred from seeing what you see that it can have profoundly negative impacts on you. And one of those cases that you're involved in, the William Dolphus Whiteside case, is one of those.
Yeah, it's one of the cases I talk about quite a bit in my memoir, and I eventually plan to write a true crime book on just that case because it's that fascinating and compelling and tragic. But William Whiteside was a 61-year-old Native American who had never harmed anyone in his life. The guy lived a fairly simple, organized life. He worked as in the maintenance department of a local hospital in Lancaster, California. And he was 61 years old, separated from his wife. In all essence, they were divorced, but they didn't get divorced for insurance purposes for her. But they were not going to be getting back together. So he meets this 35-year-old Valerie Martin, and when she gets a job working in the same department that he's working in, and they end up hitting it off. And I think that a lot of people will say, okay, well, 61 and 35. So there's some underlying things going on there. And one of those things is that Valerie Martin is kind of down on her luck. She needs a place to stay, et cetera. And she moves in with him in his modest little mobile home in a little mobile home park. And, life is okay for both of them. He's got companionship. She's got a place to stay. And everything's going along just great until her little son gets out of juvenile hall, and he's 16 years old, and he's a skinhead, and he's a tweaker, and pretty soon all of his tweaker skinhead friends start hanging around and then staying at the trailer. And Whiteside is fed up with it, and of course Valerie starts using meth again now that all these tweakers are hanging around, and ultimately they devise a plan to get rid of Whiteside because he's kind of in the way of what they're wanting to do. And he's kind of encouraging her to get rid of the kid and his friends. So they decide instead to get rid of him, and they plan to kill him. And Valerie is the headmaster of this plan. And she calls him one night when he gets off work at midnight and says, hey, can you go pick up out there? And she sends him to this desert location. And so he agrees. He drives out there to pick up little, the 16-year-old skinhead. And he is with his 27-year-old skinhead friend and a 14-year-old. And they jump him and they beat him, crack his head open, drag him out of his car, stuff him in his trunk. They start driving away. They're driving to a more remote location in the desert. And they hear him trying to get out of the trunk, and they stop and they beat him some more. And by the way, they use sticks that they refer to as the N-word beaters. And so they use these sticks and they're beating him because, let me back up a second, they actually refer to William Whiteside as the N-word because, of course, he's not pure white. He's not white. So anyone that's not white, to be honest with you, Danny,
they make no sense to me. I find them revolting, disgusting. I've had my dealings with them before. I've never understood them. When we returned to our conversation with Danny Smith, and we were talking more about this case, it gets worse You can listen to the show as a podcast for free. That's right, 100% free. Just go to letradioshow.com, click the Be Heard tab, you'll find us there. Or do a Google search for a Law Enforcement Today podcast. Be sure to subscribe today. Remember, it's free. This is the Law Enforcement Today show. We're there a short break. We'll be right back. One of the most frequent questions we see is, where can I find great podcasts? Do you have any suggestions? Yes, we do. So we decided to start our own podcast network on Law Enforcement Today. That's right. You can find top podcasts about law enforcement on our website and our free app. Go to letradioshow.com, click the Be Heard tab, and there you'll find the LET Podcast Network. We'll be adding more podcasts from first responders and more. Again, to find the Law Enforcement Today Podcast Network, go to letradioshow.com and click on the Be Heard in our menu, or download our free app today at letradioshow.com. Turn conversation with Danny Smith. Danny is retired LA County Sheriff's Detective, a homicide detective bureau, last 7 years of career. He is a private investigator. He's a consultant and author of the Dickie Floyd novels. Go online to dickiefloydnovels.com to get more information about him and his books. Before the break, Danny, you're talking about the abduction. They're beating William Dolphus Whiteside, and this is the son of the woman he took in as a companion and or girlfriend, for lack of better words.
Yeah, and she sent him out to have this meeting out in the remote desert. So as heinous as that is, I mean, that's the fact. And so they're driving along. They're going to a more remote area. They stop. They beat him some more. Ray, the 16-year-old, he remembers that his mom said, make sure you get the ATM card because she had the code. So they take the ATM card and close the trunk, and they drive out to this desolate area, call the mom, and she comes out with gasoline. So right now you have lying in wait, robbery, kidnap, torture. And when Valerie arrives with the gasoline, the boys pour the gasoline on the car and set it on fire with William Whiteside in the trunk of his own car. Now, the autopsy shows that he was not dead when they set the car on fire. So he was curled up in a ball in the darkest recess of that trunk, and he died a horrible, unspeakable death.
That's horrible to hear. I know people have asked you if you're like me, you don't even like telling people these stories, because one of the questions they'll ask is, how can someone do that? And I don't have an answer. I don't know.
Evil. That's how they, just pure evil, Jay. And that's, I one of the things on my blog, I write some of this stuff on my blog, and most of it's in my memoir, but one of the things I wrote about was when I interviewed Valerie Martin, when I got her to confess to what she had done, I used some of those tactics that are most useful in a good interrogation. And I kept telling her, that she wasn't a bad gal, that she had made some mistakes. And at one point I was holding her hand and getting her to talk about this deal. And of course, she was lying through most of it, but it was just the most bizarre thing, because I'm trying to show this compassion and that I understand, the situation she's got herself into. But all I'm thinking during the whole thing is my God, you evil, it was just horrific. And the outcome of the case, long story short, the 14-year-old pled to a deal. He had a limited amount of time in prison, which he would have had anyway because of his age. And he testified against the others and told the whole story, which is how, we knew all the details. The 16-year-old was tried as an adult, and he got life without the possibility of parole, as did the 27-year-old. And then Valerie, she was given the death penalty. So she is what they consider a condemned prisoner with the California Department of Corrections, although they'll never actually execute her. But I think it was a deserving sentence nonetheless.
She's been on death row how many years?
A woman. Oh, that case was in 2000 or 2001, 2001 or 2, somewhere in there. So she's been on death row for 20 years approximately, and she'll be there forever, that's fine too. I don't necessarily want to see her executed. I have to be honest. There's people I put on death row that I'd love to see executed, but I think that we all, there's something different about, when it's a woman, and that's why there's very few women that are ever given the death penalty, But I just don't ever want her to be on the street again, and she deserves to spend her life in prison.
I hear you.
Sure.
I agree 100%. I want to backtrack. One of the most powerful things you said, Danny, is the investigation where you're doing the interrogation. You have to be friendly. You almost have to act like you understand, and you're compassionate, and you're their friend, and you find a person and what they did to be absolutely revolting and goes against all of your nature. That creates a conflict for a lot of people internally.
Yeah, it's nothing like the movies, where you're slamming books and yelling and screaming. Cops figured out, several generations ago that rarely elicits a confession, and is more likely actually to bring out a false confession. So, we don't use those tactics, and to get, most people know better than to confess to murder. So to get someone to actually confess even partially takes a very crafty approach to the interview, and oftentimes, it's role playing, because you have to put yourself in a place where you're not letting your emotions about this man that was burned alive come into play as you're looking this woman in the eyes and telling her that she's not a bad gal, that she's made some mistakes.
And people wonder why sometimes we're not the most social people in the world.
Right. Exactly.
I think it's because we've seen the dark side of what people do to each other for too long that, there was a time, Danny, when I was much younger, I was concerned about whether people liked me or not. Now I'm more concerned whether I like them or not.
I wrote in one of my novels, I wrote about one of my characters who, he was having trouble. He was reflecting on trouble that he'd had with his ex-wife, and how, she was kind of a social butterfly, and wanted him to go to, the business cocktail party that she would attend. And he was just reflecting on this, about how can he go there and relate to anybody in the room, and that there's no doubt someone would say, oh, so you're a homicide detective. And then they'd say something as stupid as, do you actually see dead people?
Yeah.
And in this novel, of course, I'm just channeling thoughts that I've had in the past, where in the novel, his thought process is, I'll tell you what, Skip, why don't you grab me another cocktail, and I'll tell you about the little girl who was beaten to death by her stepdad. How would that be?
Yeah.
Because it's so atrocious. Like, why we don't want to have a conversation with people that have no understanding of what type of life we live. And that's not a good thing, Jay. I mean, to be truthful about it.
It creates a really closed social circle, and eventually winds up where it's just us. And then we're in the worst company of all, because then it's just us and our thoughts. And before we run out of time, I want to talk about your books. You've got, what'd you say, 7 of them so far? 7 novels and a memoir. You got 8 written pieces here. I can barely write a letter. I got to send a card to my daughter for her birthday, and it's late. So I'm the worst excuse. Your website is DickieFloydNovels.com. That's DICKIE Floyd, FLOYD novels.com. Why the name Dickie Floyd?
Well, so the first series of books, the first 6 books I published, the 2 main characters in the books are Dickie and Floyd. And they're 2 detectives, LA detectives, and they're loosely based on a couple of characters I know pretty well, and I'll leave it at that. But that's just kind of how it started. And then, it's easier to say the murdermemo.com. It takes you to the same place, just murdermemo.com. And that's where my blog is and all the information about my books. But the memoir that I've just released is probably, as much as I hope people read my novels because they're entertaining, I really hope that a lot of cops and I hope everyone reads my memoir, because Jay, I really am honest in that memoir, and I talk about the dark places that I went. And I think that I'll say I know a lot of cops never admit to some of the things I talk about in this book, and I think that it would behoove more of us to get to a point where we can be open and discuss our darkest
I agree with you
places.
100%. Danny, I want to thank you so much for your service and really appreciate being guest on the show. All very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Real quick, Jay, the memoir is called Nothing Left to Prove by Danny R. Smith.
Great name, great title, because guess what? Like you, I got nothing left to prove. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jay.
I'd like to thank our guests so much for coming on the Law Enforcement Today radio show. The Law Enforcement Today radio show is a nationally syndicated radio show broadcast on numerous stations once a week and growing. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, please do me a big favor. Tell a friend. I'll be back in just a couple days with a brand new episode of the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.
Memorial Day deals are here at Lowe's. Get up to 40% off select major appliances, including Samsung. Plus, save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances $396 or more, like the Samsung Bespoke French Door Refrigerator featuring beverage center and dual ice maker. Shop at Lowe's today. We help, you save. Valid 5/15 through 6/18. Selection varies by location. Total savings varies based on purchase amount. See Lowe's.com for details.